March 1942, outside Manila. The air was thick with kerosene lamps and mildew, a suffocating heat that never seemed to break, even at night. I lay awake on a bamboo mat, listening to rats scrape inside the walls while guards smoked just beyond the door. Their boots shifted against the gravel, and every time I heard the sound, I froze, my body tensing against whatever might come next. Far above, I caught the low hum of an American bomber moving across the clouds, so faint it felt like a trick of the imagination, a reminder that the world outside this barrack still existed. I was 21, born in Kyushu, Japan. When I left home, they told me I would serve the empire as a nurse. They said my hands would heal the wounded, that I would be the gentle-faced soldiers remembered when the war grew unbearable. But when I arrived in the Philippines, I was herded, with dozens of other women, into what the officers called a comfort station. That phrase was a lie that cut deep. My name I will not write here. I have only this notebook, torn and stained, where I record the truth that must not be lost. One line I scrawled weeks earlier burned in my head. I was supposed to heal wounds. Instead, I am the wound. The officers spoke of duty and sacrifice, of loyalty to the emperor. They told us we were protecting the morale of the soldiers, giving them strength to fight against the Americans and their allies. But my reality was a small, windowless room, bamboo mats damp with sweat, filthy sheets never washed, and the gnawing fear of disease in my blood. They feasted on rice, fish, and pickled plums while we swallowed thin porridge that stank of mold. Sometimes, in those first nights, I closed my eyes and tried to conjure the memory of my mother's miso soup, the steam curling above the bowl. But every time I did, the sound of boots or the smell of sweat would break the memory apart. I clung to small illusions, the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. At first, I believed the war would end quickly, that Japan would defeat the Americans and send us home in triumph. That was the story whispered by the guards, who repeated the victories in Singapore and Hong Kong as if they were prayers. But as the months wore on, I began to hear other whispers, carried by soldiers who staggered in with mud still on their boots. They spoke of American submarines strangling supply lines, of bombers appearing more frequently in the skies. Those scraps of information lodged inside me like splinters of hope. If the Americans were still out there, perhaps the end would not be what the officers promised. Day after day blurred into the same sickening pattern. Dawn was marked by the sound of bugles in the distance, followed by the guards' shouts and the shuffle of exhausted soldiers reporting for roll call. By mid-morning, the air inside our quarters was thick with heat, sweat dripping from my scalp, the stench of bodies and disinfectant clawing at my throat. I kept my eyes on the floor whenever the officers entered, because eye contact could be punished with a slap or worse. They told us we were fortunate compared to the prisoners of war, men locked in camps nearby, starved until their bones showed through skin. That comparison was supposed to make us grateful. Instead, it made me ache, imagining those men suffering behind barbed wire while we suffered in rooms without locks. Sometimes I glimpsed them, the American and Filipino prisoners, marched along dirt roads under guard. Their uniforms hung in tatters, their faces hollow, and yet, when their eyes met mine for a brief second, I felt a jolt of recognition. They were enemies, and yet not. They were human beings, stripped down to endurance, just as I was. One afternoon, as rain hammered the tin roof and the air smelled of wet earth, I heard a Japanese sergeant laughing outside. He had intercepted a leaflet dropped from an American plane. I caught only a glimpse before he burned it, but the words seared into me, promises of liberation, of an end to Japanese occupation. I wondered if they were real, or just another weapon in a war of lies. The longer I stayed, the more the war pressed itself into my body. My skin broke out in rashes from the damp, my stomach twisted from spoiled food, and each night I felt a part of myself dissolve. I wrote in my notebook whenever I could, though the guards threatened punishment if they discovered it. If I survive this, I scribbled once, it will be because words are stronger than silence. Still, I could not stop the questions that tore at me. How long would this last? Would anyone remember me if I vanished here? Did the outside world even know what was happening in these barracks, in these so-called stations scattered across Asia? Sometimes I feared the answer was no, that we were already erased, even before death came for us. But there was one moment that changed everything, a moment that made me realize history was moving closer, step by step. It was in late October when distant artillery thundered from the direction of the sea. The guards grew tense, their voices sharper, their boots stomping faster across the gravel. Rumors spread that the Americans were returning, that General MacArthur had landed on Leyte with an army determined to retake the Philippines. The barracks shuddered with anxiety. Some guards boasted that Japan would repel the invasion. Others muttered that defeat was inevitable. For me, it was not yet hope. It was terror wrapped in possibility. Liberation might mean freedom, or it might mean death. All I knew was that the world beyond these walls was coming closer, and soon the lies would no longer protect the men who kept us here. That night, lying on the damp mat with the sound of rats scratching inches from my head, I whispered to myself words I had never dared to say aloud. Maybe the Americans will come. Maybe they will see me. The thought burned so bright inside me that I almost felt it could pierce the darkness. And then the guards began to prepare for retreat. November 1944. The ground trembled before the sound reached us. At first, it was only a low vibration under the bamboo floor, then a dull thunder that grew louder each day. The Americans had landed on Leyte, and soon the news spread through every corner of the garrison. Some guards tried to laugh it off, boasting that the Imperial Navy would send the enemy back into the sea, but others whispered about ships sunk, convoys destroyed, and aircraft that never returned. We, the women, felt the shift like animals before a storm. Something vast was moving closer, and none of us knew whether it would crush or release us. Our comfort station became a cage of rumors. One day a soldier swore the Japanese fleet had destroyed hundreds of American ships. The next, another muttered that the battle had been a disaster, that thousands of Japanese were dead. I learned to read the truth in their eyes. The bravado cracked. Supplies grew thinner. Rice was stretched with husks, water rationed, soap vanished. Even the guards' uniforms began to fray. I could see them trembling when bombers droned overhead, the earth shuddering with each detonation on distant targets. At night, when the air was heavy with the stink of unwashed bodies, I pressed my face to the wooden wall and listened. From beyond the fences came the groans of Allied prisoners, American and Filipino men kept in camps nearby. Sometimes I heard them singing softly, their voices thin but stubborn, as if refusing to surrender their humanity. I envied them that defiance. My voice lived only in these pages, the lines I scratched by moonlight. The guards are no longer gods. They are men who sweat, who fear. If they fear, then perhaps they can fall. Yet fear cut both ways. If the Americans came, what would they see when they looked at me? Would they see a victim or a collaborator? I wore no uniform, carried no weapon, but I had served the enemy each night in silence. The thought twisted my stomach. Would they free me, or would they turn their eyes away? The first time I saw an American up close, he was a prisoner. His body was nothing but bones under yellowed skin, his hair matted with lice. He stumbled as the guards marched him down the road, his shackles clinking like cruel bells. For a moment his eyes lifted and met mine through the slats of the wall. They were blue, startlingly clear, and in them I saw not hatred, but recognition. He knew what I was, even without words. I pressed my hand to the wall, foolishly, as if I could bridge the distance. He was shoved forward, and the moment was gone. But it remained inside me like a spark that refused to die. The raids grew constant. By December, the sky itself seemed American. Squadrons of bombers flew so high they looked like silver fish swimming against the sun, and when they dropped their payloads, the ground shook as if the earth had cracked open. We huddled together, the air vibrating with the roar, plaster raining from the ceilings. The guards cursed and shouted, but their rage sounded thin against the power from above. One woman beside me whispered, "This is the sound of the end." And yet, even as liberation approached, the cruelty around us deepened. The Japanese command grew desperate. Soldiers came to our station more often, their faces wild with drink, their hands rougher than before. They spoke of dying with honor, of fighting to the last man, but their eyes were those of animals cornered. We felt the weight of their despair in our flesh. I began to wonder if survival itself was betrayal, if living through each night meant surrendering what was left of my soul. By January 1945, Manila was a city of ruins. Smoke smeared the sky day and night. Buildings collapsed under shell fire, and fires turned the horizon orange. From our station, I could hear the crack of rifles, the rattle of machine guns, the thunder of artillery rolling ever closer. Civilians fled in ragged lines, women clutching children, old men hobbling with sticks. Sometimes they passed close enough that I could see their faces, hollow with hunger and terror. I wanted to run with them, to vanish into the chaos, but the guards kept us locked inside. They swore that if the Americans broke through, they would kill us before letting us fall into enemy hands. One night, I overheard two soldiers arguing. One insisted the Americans were only days away. The other said Manila would be defended street by street, that the city would become a graveyard for both sides. His words chilled me more than any bomb. If the Japanese chose to die here, what chance did I have of living long enough to see freedom? I wrote again in my notebook, the words shaking from my hand. If liberation comes, it may be through fire. I do not know if I want it to hurry or to delay. Both paths end in blood. And then, in February, the walls shook not from bombs, but from voices, English voices, shouting commands, calling to one another. The battle had reached the heart of Manila. The guards scrambled, their eyes wide with panic. Some fled into the streets. Others dragged rifles into position, swearing they would fight to the death. Through a crack in the wall, I saw American soldiers advancing cautiously, their helmets glinting in the sun, rifles raised. My heart hammered so hard, I thought it would burst. After 3 years of silence, of shame and fear, the moment I had imagined and dreaded was here. I pressed my back to the wall, torn between the urge to scream for help and the terror that if I spoke, a bullet would find me first. The barrack door rattled under a blow. Another, harder. The guards shouted. One fired his rifle blindly. A grenade clinked onto the floor. Time froze. There was light, sound, smoke, then nothing. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. When the smoke cleared, the air burned my lungs. My ears rang, and for a moment, I thought I had died. The bamboo walls were splintered, the floor littered with fragments of wood and shattered bottles. The guards lay sprawled in grotesque silence, blood soaking into the dirt. And standing in the doorway were men in uniforms I had never seen up close before. Helmets strapped tight, rifles held steady, boots caked in the dust of war. American soldiers. I remember one of them shouting words I barely understood, English syllables sharp as gunfire. Another raised his fist and motioned us out. My body trembled so violently I could barely stand. Beside me, one woman wailed, another clutched at her torn dress as if modesty still mattered in a world without mercy. We stepped forward like ghosts, blinking against the daylight, afraid the vision might vanish if we moved too quickly. Outside, Manila was unrecognizable. Buildings gutted by fire stood like blackened teeth against a sky smudged with smoke. The air stank of burning oil, rotting food, and something worse, flesh. Civilians scurried through the ruins with bundles on their backs, children barefoot and silent. The sound of machine guns echoed down shattered streets, answered by the deeper boom of artillery. The Americans herded us behind a wall for cover, their movements practiced, efficient, as though saving lives in the middle of chaos was something they did every day. For the first time in years, I felt air that was not trapped, not rationed. It rushed into my lungs so sharply I almost cried. One soldier glanced at me, his face streaked with dust, his eyes quick and unreadable. Did he know what I was? Could he see the stain on me? The truth of where I had been kept? A medic approached, a young man with a Red Cross armband. He tried to speak slowly, but the words still tumbled too fast for me. I caught fragments. Safe now. Hospital. Food. His hands were gentle as he guided me to sit, pressing a canteen of water into my fingers. The liquid was warm, metallic, but to me it was sweeter than anything I had tasted in years. I drank too fast, coughed, then drank again. Around me the other women clutched their own canteens as if they were treasures, but as relief washed over me, shame rose with it. Did they know who we were? Not prisoners, not soldiers, not even civilians. Comfort women. I wondered if the Americans understood that word, if they would judge us as collaborators, willing participants. My tongue felt heavy. I could not explain, could not confess, could not ask for forgiveness. All I could do was drink their water and pray they did not look too closely at the chains I carried inside me. They led us through streets littered with corpses. Japanese snipers fired from shattered windows, bullets cracking overhead. The Americans fired back without hesitation. I flinched at every sound, my body still wired for punishment. Each explosion reminded me of the guards' threats, that we would die if the enemy ever came. Yet here I was, alive, my feet stumbling forward under the cover of men I had been taught to fear. At a crossroads we passed a column of American tanks, their engines growling like beasts, treads grinding over rubble. On their hulls were names painted in white: Battle in Buckaroo, Texas Rose. The soldiers riding them laughed and smoked even as shells burst in the distance. I realized then that I was seeing something Japan had promised could never exist: American strength on our soil, moving inexorably forward. In the distance, a church burned. Its bell collapsed in molten lumps on the ground. Civilians huddled in the ruins, waving white cloths at the Americans. Some fell to their knees, sobbing. I wanted to kneel too, but my legs would not bend. My body was numb, my spirit torn between gratitude and disbelief. That night, the Americans housed us in a makeshift camp behind sandbags. We were given tins of Spam, bread so soft it crumbled in my fingers, and coffee so bitter it made my head spin. I ate until my stomach hurt. One woman vomited from the shock of sudden fullness, but still she smiled through tears. For the first time, no guard shouted, no soldier demanded our bodies. We lay on blankets, wrapped in fatigue jackets the Americans had stripped from their own packs, and listened to the night without fear of the door opening. I should have felt joy. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the stars, wondering what freedom meant for someone like me. The other women whispered about home, about finding families, about disappearing into the flood of refugees. I had no answers. What would my mother say if I returned? Would she embrace me or turn her face away? Could I ever walk into a shrine again without feeling unworthy? The Americans did not ask questions that night. Perhaps they did not want to know. Perhaps they already knew and chose silence, but I could not silence myself. In my notebook, under the weak glow of a lantern, I wrote, "They have freed my body, but my soul still waits for release. Who will free that?" Days passed in a blur of fire and thunder. The Battle of Manila raged all around us. Entire districts were flattened. Civilians were massacred in numbers I could not comprehend. I saw mothers carrying lifeless children, fathers digging graves with bare hands. Liberation was not the clean promise written on American leaflets. It was mud, blood, and ashes. Yet even in that chaos, there was a difference. No one came for us at night. No one ordered us to serve. That silence was its own kind of miracle. One afternoon, while the Americans secured another block, I overheard two soldiers talking. They mentioned a division number, the 37th Infantry Division, from Ohio, I think. They joked about baseball teams, about home cooking. Their words meant little to me, but their laughter was like a language I had almost forgotten. A language not built on orders, but on choice. I felt tears sting my eyes. Still, I could not forget the Japanese soldiers, the ones who had taken everything. Some had fled. Others still fought in pockets, determined to die rather than surrender. I feared they might return, that my brief taste of freedom would be snatched away. At night I woke sweating, certain I heard boots outside the camp, certain the door would crash open and the old nightmare would resume. But every time it was only the distant thud of artillery or the whistle of shells passing overhead. By the end of February, Manila was declared secure. The Americans pushed north, chasing the retreating Japanese into the mountains. For us, it meant the war moved farther away, though not out of memory. The camp was dismantled, and we were sent with other refugees to a hospital set up in a converted school. Doctors examined us, wrote notes in languages I could not read. Some women received medicines, injections. I sat on a cot with my hands clenched, waiting for judgment. The doctor who looked at me was middle-aged, with kind eyes behind his glasses. He did not speak Japanese, but he gestured gently, listened when I stammered broken English. He wrote something on his chart, then placed a hand on my shoulder and simply said, "Safe." That word broke something in me. I turned my face away and wept, and yet, even as tears fell, I knew safety was not the same as peace. I had been freed, yes, but freed into a world that might never understand what I had endured, that might not want to understand. As the days stretched on, one question echoed louder than any explosion. What would become of me now? The war did not end the day the Americans freed us. For weeks, Manila remained a graveyard. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble, the air heavy with smoke and the sweet, sickening smell of bodies not yet buried. Every day, trucks carried the wounded to hospitals, set up in churches, schools, and warehouses. I moved among them like a shadow, a woman with no clear role, too healthy to be a patient, too broken to be called free. The nurses asked my name for their records, but I could not bring myself to answer. To give my name felt like admitting that the woman I had been, the daughter from Kyushu who once dreamed of nursing, still existed. She did not. The comfort station had erased her. What walked among the ruins was something else, something the Americans looked at with pity, but never fully saw. One afternoon, I sat in the courtyard of the school that now served as a refugee camp. Children chased one another between the trees, their laughter piercing the silence of war. A soldier approached and handed me a small square of chocolate wrapped in silver. I had not tasted sweetness in years. The first bite melted bitter and rich on my tongue, and tears slid down my cheeks before I could stop them. He looked startled, then simply nodded and walked away. That piece of chocolate was not just food. It was proof that life contained more than duty, more than suffering. Still, shame clung to me like a second skin. When the doctors spoke of returning us home, I felt fear instead of joy. How could I face my mother, my village, carrying the truth of what had been done to me? Would they understand, or would they turn their backs? I had heard whispers among the other women. Some planned to lie, to say they had been nurses, laborers, prisoners of war. Anything but the truth. I could not blame them. The word comfort woman was already becoming poison, something no one wanted to speak aloud. At night, I wrote in my notebook, my only anchor. The Americans opened the door of the cage, but I carry the cage inside me. Perhaps I always will. Still, I breathe. That must count for something. In March 1945, I was transported with a group of women and civilians out of Manila. We rode in trucks past shattered buildings, past fields scorched black, past the skeletons of tanks rusting in ditches. American soldiers guarded the convoy, their rifles pointed outward, scanning for ambushes. The Japanese had fled into the mountains, but they still struck in sudden bursts of violence. I clutched my notebook as if it were a weapon, though I knew words could not stop bullets. When we reached the port, I saw ships anchored offshore, gray giants bristling with guns. Refugees crowded the docks, begging for places on board. I felt small in that mass of humanity, another lost face among thousands. Yet in that chaos, I also felt something new. The war was larger than me, larger than my suffering, and somehow that made it easier to breathe. Days turned into weeks, and then into months. The war ground on in the north, in Iwo Jima, in Okinawa. Each battle claimed tens of thousands of lives. I listened to the news in fragments, the voices of American soldiers crackling over radios, reporting victories, losses, endless lists of the dead. In August, the rumor spread like wildfire. Japan had surrendered. A new weapon, something beyond comprehension, had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war was over. I did not cheer. I thought of my family, somewhere in Kyushu, perhaps alive, perhaps not. I thought of the women who had died in the stations, their bodies buried in shallow graves, their names erased. The war was over, but for us there would be no parades, no medals, no stories in newspapers, only silence. When at last I was offered passage back to Japan, I hesitated. Could I walk through the door of my home, carrying this shame? Could I look into my mother's eyes and tell her the truth? Or would I lie, as so many others planned to do? I never found the answer. What I did know was this. I had survived. The Americans had torn open the walls of my prison, and in that moment, I had glimpsed something I had not believed in for years. Possibility. Perhaps not forgiveness, not even peace, but the possibility of a life beyond the comfort station. Now, as I write these words years later, I understand that history often forgets those who were neither heroes nor villains, but merely survivors. Yet our stories matter. Mine matters. I was a Japanese comfort woman, and I was shocked when American soldiers finally freed me. And so I leave these words as a witness, as a warning, and as a reminder that freedom does not erase wounds. It only allows them to breathe. If my voice reached you, If this story made you feel something, do not let it vanish into silence. Subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and share your thoughts. Your voice keeps stories like mine alive.